guys, welcome to this new series of how to, where we look at various creative programs on the computer and start at the basics. This video has been requested by some of our first year students as well as some students on other programs, creative programs, but it's also really useful for learners who are just starting with us at the start of the academic year or who want to brush up their skills in certain Adobe programs. So today we're going to look at Photoshop, and this is going to be a 4-part series. This episode we're going to look at the toolbar, the menus, basic editing and a little bit about workspaces. And as the series progresses we will be looking at more advanced options so that at the end of episode 4 you should have a basic grasp of how to use Photoshop. So to start off with, I'm going to show you the menu, which is here at the top. I'm working at the minute on a Mac. It's similar on a Windows. There's not much difference from what I can recall, but I am working on a Mac just for a bit of context. To start off with, I'm going to open an image and show you how to do that. Although it sounds really simple, some people do struggle with this. So to do that, you can click on File and Open and find your image. So I'm just going to use this one that I took of a leaf. Under the File toolbar as well, there are other options of things that you can do. This is the most commonly used one for opening and saving files. So File and New will give you the option of creating a blank document with loads of different options. So from photo to the typical sort of printing ratios, to A4, A5, which is typical sort of design sizes. Art and illustration with pixel grids, which I don't often use, but if you're into animation and drawing on the computer, these will be really beneficial. Web-based outputs, mobile-based outputs, as well as film and video. But today, and for the majority of our tutorials, we will just be looking at using the photo or the print ones. So with this picture that I've got open now, I will just go through some more of these toolbars so you can see what they do. So on Edit, even though there are quite a lot of them greyed out at the minute, that just means we can't use them. There are ones such as Transform. So let me just, so that you'll be able to see that. On Transform, you can be able to scale it, rotate, skew, rotate images a certain amount and flip them as well. This is useful if you've got more than one layer, but I could flip this horizontal now and it would turn the other way. This is really good as well for what you've just seen of being able to step backwards and forwards. So if you do make a mistake and you want to change what you've done, these are sort of like edit undo. And stuff like that, so they're really useful. And as you can see, next to each menu action there are these symbols with letters, and these are the keyboard shortcuts. Now I use keyboard shortcuts quite a lot, but I can understand that it would be really difficult to start to learn them, but if you want to learn them, then the best place to start would be to learn the common ones that are on Photoshop, and these are pretty much across all of the Adobe programs. But you can get a little refresher if you want to learn those. Moving on to image now, this is where you have quite a lot of options for photography. So being able to change the image size and the canvas size. Now these are different. The image size is how big the actual image is. So it tells you all about your resolution and the size of your image and how many pixels you've got. Whereas the canvas size will change the overall canvas. So if I click in the middle here and I want to change my canvas to 10 centimeters, it will create space around it. It will not change the size of the picture. So that's the differences between those two. You can rotate your images here as well. So if you wanted to have it on its side, or you wanted to flip something, this is where you would do it for just a normal picture without having it in a layer. You also have the option here of all of your typical basic Photoshop editing. So changing the brightness and contrast, changing stuff into black and white. You've got some fun ones like posterize and invert, which you won't use very often, but this is where they're all kept. So if you are just loading a picture in to do some really basic editing, then this is where you would start. So if I wanted to change this picture into black and white, I could do so here. I can play around with the colours and stuff like that. but that is basically where all the basic editing functions are in the program. So these are really useful, like I've said, if you just want to edit a photo really simply and then save it. It is worth in your own time having a look through each individual one. Some of the common ones that I use are brightness and contrast, where you can change the brightness and the contrast of an image, as well as black and white, which I've already shown you, but also shadows and highlights, which can add a bit of depth and contrast to your image as well. But each editing technique will do a different thing to your photograph, and it will also work differently for each photograph. So it is worth having a little look through and finding which types of editing you actually prefer in your work, and doing that as well. The next one that is really useful as we go across is Select, and this is also a troubleshooting exercise for a lot of students when working with this on the toolbar here with the regular marquee. So a lot of students will accidentally select something or have the dancing ants around the frame, and if you click on select and then deselect, you can get rid of that. So if you find, and I will go through this a lot at this end of the series in episode 4, if you find that you are having problems with editing or the editing techniques you're using aren't necessarily going on your image, just make sure you click on select and deselect, just to make sure there's nothing hiding in the picture that you've highlighted by accident. Moving on to the next one, this is where all of the unusual photography filters are found. Now, I don't use these very often. I use blur quite a lot for working with retouching and editing of faces, but we have here something called the filter gallery. I use this a lot with students in the initial learning about Photoshop, just so you can see the capabilities of Photoshop, but often I don't use these. They are fun to have a little work through. You've got some ones, quite unusual ones to do with art, even some to do with brushstrokes and cross-hatching and all that sort of stuff. But it is a really useful tool to use if you are just starting to learn how to use Photoshop. You can get some really fun effects using this method, and especially if you are into art, it can help you understand different artistic techniques and how your photograph might look in the end. As well as using the filter gallery on here, there is another one called Liquify. Now, I use this with my students a lot on the makeup course as a way of understanding this process, but Liquify has had a bit of an update, and you are able to stretch and skew your image to make it look slightly unusual. Now, this is used a lot in the fashion industry, perhaps not so much anymore, but it has been known to change the shape of faces and to change the shape of bodies and stuff like that, but it can be used for pretty much anything. Even if you are looking to distort the picture to make it look unusual or quite funny, you can do that as well, and I will go through Liquify in a lot more detail in a separate episode. Okay, moving on filter as well, you also have these options here. Now again, I've not used a lot of these options. I use blur quite a lot for Gaussian blur when retouching images, but if you are interested in any of these, they are very specific. I would just have a go with them and see what they do. They're not going to be there for professional photography. It is going to distort your image quite heavily, but they are useful for their own merits. So looking back on some of the Photoshop tutorials on photography takeaway with Laura, you'll be able to see where some of these will come in useful. And finally, on our menu at the top, moving on to window, there are different workspaces you can use. Now at the moment I'm using the photography workspace, but it is always set onto the essentials default one as a starting point. So if I just go back on there now, you can see I've got the colour grid, I've got some properties and some basic adjustments and my layers. There isn't much difference between using the essentials and the photography one. I use the photography one just so I've not got the distraction of having the colour, but we will work using the essentials one today just so you can see what it's like when you would log into Photoshop for the first time. Okay, moving on, we're going to look at the toolbar here on the left hand side, and although a lot of students when I first show them this get a bit freaked out and get a bit worried about it, there are lots of tools on here that I've not used or don't use enough, so you won't need to use them all. They've all got the different merits, but I will just go through some of them now. Now, the really good thing about having Photoshop CC is that when you hover over one of the tools, it will come up with a little graphic showing you what it does, but also a description, and it also has a link to learn how to use it. Now I could go through all of them in this episode and show you each one, but I will just go through some of the most commonly used ones today. If you come across a tool that you see, I would definitely recommend using the Adobe sort of tutorials and methods to go through, because they are really helpful. I would just be repeating information, but yeah, if you do hover over any of them, it will come up with a description and a graphic of how to use it. Now the move tool is a really important one. As it says on the tin, it literally moves your photograph. Now it's moving mine at the minute because I've changed one of my layers. But it will move layers around, it will move images around. It's an all-round good tool. Now, as you can see on the bottom right hand corner here, there's a little triangle, and what this means is there are more tools attached to that box. So if you click and hold down on the little tool there, you'll be able to see the other options. Now, as far as I'm aware with Photoshop, it shows you the most commonly used ones first, which again is really useful. But if you do want to use some of the ones that perhaps aren't as commonly used, you will just have to hold and click, and that is for a lot of them. Now moving down, before you saw me use this one when we were talking about deselecting work. This is a rectangular marquee tool, and it makes a selection in the shape of a rectangle. Now this is good for working with particular parts of a layer. If you wanted to select a certain part of the image and get rid of the rest of it, this is good for when you're working with layering, which I will go through in the next video. But underneath there you've got different types. You've got the circle, marquee tool, and different rows and columns. Now I am just going to, now that I've selected this, just deselect it. So select and deselect, and it will disappear. Moving down here, we have got the lasso tools. Now mine is automatically selected on the polygonal lasso tool, but that is because I was working on a separate project for a tutorial. But you do have the lasso tool, which is just a free style of tool, and a magnetic one as well. Again, in the next episode we will be going through lassos in a lot more detail. Another really common one is the crop tool. Now this is exactly what it says on the tin. It will crop your image. Now at the minute mine is set to crop to the original ratio, so it will only crop to a 6:4. But if you click here, you can choose loads of different presets. So the common ones like 8:10 and 6:4 for printing images, but also some ones that I've selected in the past for certain graphic design projects or for certain frame sizes. And you can also create your own crops as well. So if you want to crop something in a panoramic style, or if you want to crop something to fit a certain photo frame at home or for an exhibition, then this is where you will create a new crop preset. You also have tools here, which is the brush tool. This is good for if you are doing digital art within Photoshop. It does exactly what it says on the tin. You can make the brush as big as you want, as small as you want, change the hardness, but also it gives you a lot of different types of brushes. So you've got different types of pencils, general brushes where you would just colour stuff in, but also special effects brushes, so such as splatter or circles and stuff like that. So you can get some really interesting effects out of it on here as well. Now anything you do paint, you can step backwards and change, but it's by each click you'll be able to step backwards. So if you have worked on something for quite a long time and you want to edit and do it, I would recommend that you would duplicate your layer, just so that you don't lose any progress. There are only so many times you can edit and undo, so I would recommend doing that. Moving further down, in terms of art, we have the paint bucket tool and the gradient tool. This is exactly what it says on the tin. You can just use the paint bucket. And we've also got the text tool. So here I could type hello, make it a bit smaller so you'll be able to see it, but also change the font as well to anything that I want. And the size. So this works similar to Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, if you wanted to use text, and that comes up as an extra layer. And finally, the zoom in and out tool. As you can see here at the top, you've got the plus and the minus. The plus will zoom in and the minus will zoom out. Now you can use Command and plus and Command and minus on your keyboard if you want to use this as a shortcut. That's what I do, but it is always worth noting that you can use this technique in the toolbar as well. And finally, at the bottom here, you've got two boxes. One is a foreground colour and one is a background colour. Now, these are useful for when you're using the paint bucket, the brush tool, any sort of art tool here. And if you also see you've got it duplicated in this corner here, you can change the colour for the foreground and the background. Now, if this will usually be set on black and white to start off with. If you wanted to work really quickly between black and white, there are two little arrows at the top here that you can use to flip them around and change your foreground and your background colour. Okay, so that's the basic editing and components of Photoshop. I know it was quite a quick video to go through and there's a lot to take in, but what I would recommend is just writing down some of the most commonly used ones that you might find yourself using. Definitely recommend getting yourself used to using the menu bar at the top for basic editing, as well as opening and saving photographs. Have a little practice with that if you've not used Photoshop before. I promise it isn't as difficult as it looks. And then next week we will look at layer masking and the lasso tools, like I said, so for cutting out images and creating layers. As always, in the meantime, if you have got any questions, then please just let me know. Either send me a message on Teams with a certain aspect of Photoshop you'd like me to cover. You can also comment on the video as well to say what you want to learn. I don't mind covering anything as long as I know. But for now, I will see you next week. Bye!